Picture this. You're walking across sun-baked volcanic ash, barefoot, next to two other members of your group. It's warm out. Rain fell recently, softening the ground just enough to leave a mark. You have no idea that 3.6 million years later, someone is going to dig up your footprint and stare at it like it's the Mona Lisa. No shoes, no sandals, not even a wrap of leaf or hide. Just skin on earth the way it had been for your entire life and every life before yours. Now think about your own feet, cushioned, arched, zipped into synthetic foam the second you leave the house. We treat bare feet on concrete like a small emergency. And yet, for the overwhelming majority of human existence, we're talking hundreds of thousands of years, arguably millions. The default setting for a human foot was simply bare. So here's the real question tonight. It's not why didn't ancient humans wear shoes? It's why did we ever start? Because the deeper you dig, the more it looks like shoes weren't an upgrade our bodies were begging for. They were a survival tool invented late, for very specific, very cold reasons, and once they existed, they quietly rewired the human foot forever. Let's start with the oldest hard evidence we have of a human foot doing its job barefoot, no interpretation needed. In 1976, at a site called Litoli in Tanzania, Mary Leakey's team uncovered a trail of footprints preserved in hardened volcanic ash, dated to roughly 3.6 million years ago. They belong to Australopithecus afarensis, not even our species yet, a full evolutionary chapter before Homo sapiens shows up. Here's the plain English version. Those footprints show a heel strike, a weight shift along the outer foot, and a push-off through a big toe that's lined up with the others, not splayed out to the side like an ape's. That's a human-style walking gait, and it was made by bare skin pressing into soft ground. There's no footwear residue, no wrap marks, nothing but a foot doing exactly what a foot is built to do. And here's the thing nobody tells you, those prints are older than fire use, older than stone tool complexity, older than language as we understand it. Barefoot walking isn't just something ancient humans did. It's older than human itself. So why does this matter to your body sitting there right now? Because the human foot is not a passive platform. It's a sensory organ. The sole of your foot has one of the highest concentrations of nerve endings anywhere on your body, packed with pressure receptors that constantly feed your brain information about the ground. Is it flat? Is it slick? Is it about to give way? That system evolved over millions of years of direct ground contact. Add to that the arch. The human foot has a spring-like arch structure that stores and releases energy with every step, working alongside the Achilles tendon like a natural shock absorber. Researchers studying persistence hunting, the theory that early humans ran prey to exhaustion over long distances, point to this arch and tendon system as one of the reasons humans became such efficient long-distance runners compared to other primates. Here's where it gets interesting. That entire system assumes direct contact with variable terrain. Take away the sensory feedback, cushion the strike, and the foot starts working differently. Not necessarily worse, but differently, which means, biologically speaking, your feet are still running ancient software. They just haven't been asked to do the ancient job in a long time. Eventually, someone did make the deliberate choice to cover their feet. And we can actually pin down some of the earliest solid proof. At Fort Rock Cave in Oregon, archaeologist Luther Cressman uncovered dozens of sandals woven from sagebrush bark, radiocarbon dated to around 10,000 years old, among the oldest confirmed footwear ever found anywhere on Earth. Woven, not improvised. Someone sat down, stripped bark, and constructed something meant to last. Then there's Otzi, the mummified man found frozen in the Ötztal Alps on the Italian-Austrian border, dated to roughly 5,300 years ago. Otzi wasn't barefoot when he died. He was wearing shoes with bearskin soles, deerhide uppers, and a layer of soft grass packed inside for insulation. Essentially an ancient version of a winter boot with built-in wool socks. Plain English. This wasn't decoration. This was engineering. Someone understood insulation, understood sole durability, understood how to keep a foot alive in brutal alpine cold. But here's the twist. Both of these examples come from cold or seasonal environments, which raises an uncomfortable question. Was footwear less about walking better and more about not losing your toes? Here's the honest answer to a question you might already be asking. If humans were making shoes 10,000 years ago, why don't we have proof of something even older? Because the materials most likely to be used, bark, hide, woven plant fiber, grass, are exactly the materials that don't survive. Organic material rots, gets eaten, decomposes within decades in most climates. Stone tools last because stone is stubborn. A sandal made of sagebrush bark is not. Fort Rock Cave's sandals only survived because the cave environment was unusually dry and stable. A fluke of geology, not a rule. Otzi only survived because he was entombed in ice, essentially freeze-dried by accident for over 5,000 years. So the real footwear timeline almost certainly stretches back further than our physical evidence allows us to prove. This isn't a dead end. It's a gap shaped entirely by chemistry and luck. Somewhere out there, earlier shoes existed and simply returned to the earth before anyone could dig them up. Sometimes the proof doesn't come from a shoe at all. It comes from beads. At Sungir, a site in Russia dated to around 34,000 years old, archaeologists found burials loaded with thousands of small ivory beads. For years, scholars just saw ornate ancient jewelry. But when researchers, notably Eric Trinkoz, who specializes in the anatomy of ancient human feet, mapped exactly where those beads clustered around the leg and foot bones, a pattern emerged. The beads weren't scattered randomly. They were arranged in lines consistent with having been sewn onto boots and leggings that later decomposed, leaving only the decoration behind. Trinkoz took it further, studying the toe bones of Upper Paleolithic humans directly. He found that starting around 40,000 years ago, the smaller toe bones in some populations became noticeably less robust, thinner, less reinforced, which he argued reflects reduced biomechanical stress consistent with regular footwear use. In other words, the bones themselves started changing shape because the feet weren't gripping bare ground the way they used to. What looked like decorative burial goods turned out to be some of the strongest indirect evidence we have that humans were wearing structured footwear tens of thousands of years before Otzi. The jewelry wasn't just jewelry. It was the ghost outline of a boot. This wasn't a one-region invention. It shows up independently everywhere humans face the same problem. In ancient Egypt, sandals made of woven papyrus and palm leaf appear in tomb art and burials, but they weren't universal. For a long stretch, sandals functioned as a marker of status, worn by pharaohs, priests, and the wealthy, while laborers and farmers frequently went barefoot in daily life. Meanwhile, across the Arctic, indigenous peoples such as the Inuit developed multi-layered skin boots specifically engineered for extreme cold, using fur orientation and layering techniques refined over countless generations. Compare that to the many indigenous cultures across Australia, sub-Saharan Africa, and the Americas that remained largely, deliberately barefoot well into the modern era, not out of lack of technology, but because in warm, dry, or forested environments, bare feet offered better grip, better sensory feedback, and nothing to repair. Here's the pattern. Footwear wasn't a universal upgrade humanity marched toward in lockstep. It was a localized answer to localized problems, cold, terrain, status, invented again and again wherever the environment demanded it, and skipped everywhere it didn't. So let's talk about the cold, practical logic because it really does come down to survival math. In frozen environments, exposed feet mean frostbite, and frostbite means gangrene, and gangrene, without modern medicine, means death. A boot packed with insulating grass, like Otzi's, isn't fashion. It's the difference between walking home and not walking home. Footwear in cold or rocky terrain also protects against lacerations, exposure to parasites that enter through the skin, and the kind of injury that, in a group with no antibiotics, can turn a small cut into a fatal infection. But, and here's where we have to be careful, in warm, stable environments, bare feet had their own survival advantages. Better traction on uneven or wet surfaces. Constant sensory feedback that helped avoid injury before it happened. No material to wear out, tear, or require replacing on a long migration. So the real survival logic wasn't shoes good, bare feet bad. It was a cost-benefit equation, solved differently depending on where you happen to be standing. Cold, sharp, or diseased ground tipped the math toward footwear. Warm, forgiving ground tipped it back toward skin. Here's the uncomfortable part. What started as a practical, regional survival solution eventually got twisted into something else entirely. A marker of civilization versus savagery. By the age of European colonization, footwear had become a loaded symbol. Colonial powers frequently framed barefoot indigenous populations, many of whom had made a perfectly rational, adapted choice for their environment, as primitive or lesser, and forced footwear onto communities as part of broader campaigns of cultural assimilation. Shoes stopped being a tool and became a badge of supposed superiority. At the same time, industrialization turned footwear into mass-produced, profit-driven manufacturing. What had once been a hand-built, environment-specific object, Otzi's grassline boot, custom to his climate and his feet, became standardized, factory-shaped, and increasingly divorced from the biomechanics it was originally solving for. The rise of hard, narrow, cushioned soles has even led some modern researchers and podiatrists to argue that decades of heavily structured footwear may have contributed to weaker arches and altered gait patterns compared to populations that walk barefoot or in minimal footwear throughout life. The practical winter boot that once saved lives in the Alps had, a few thousand years later, become both a colonial weapon and an industrial commodity. A strange, uncomfortable arc for something that started as nothing more than grass stuffed into bearskin. So here's what we actually know. Bare feet came first by millions of years, not thousands. The Litoli footprints prove it. Footwear shows up late, and where it does show up, it's usually solving a specific local problem. Alpine cold at Otzi's site, Ice Age exposure at Sungir, status and hierarchy in ancient Egypt. And maybe that's the real reframe here. Humans didn't invent shoes because bare feet were a flaw to fix. We invented them because we kept walking into places our feet weren't built for, and then we let that invention outgrow its original purpose entirely. Think about it. Mary Leakey's ash footprints. Otzi's grass-stuffed boots in the Alps. Those quiet rows of beads at Sungir, tracing the outline of a boot that rotted away 34,000 years ago. Sandals woven from Oregon sagebrush, still intact in a dry cave after 10,000 years. Every one of those is a snapshot of a foot solving a problem. Right now, your feet are doing the same ancient job they've always done. Reading the ground, adjusting, adapting. Whether you're barefoot on your kitchen floor or laced into shoes you haven't thought twice about all day, the ground hasn't changed. We just decided here and there to stop touching it directly. Some inventions save your toes. Others just cover them up.